G'day, this is Chris Savage from Real Ministries in Australia, welcoming you to this session of the Footsteps of the Messiah. I pray that it will be of benefit to you and help you in your Christian growth. Thank you for coming along. So welcome to this session 11 of the Footsteps of the Messiah, which is a study of the last days. We're in the section on the Great Tribulation, and we will just... last session, we just finished off on the Antichrist, the person of the Antichrist. We know that he's a counterfeit son. In fact, it's a counterfeit trinity with Satan being the father, Antichrist being the counterfeit son, and the false false prophet being the counterfeit Holy Spirit. Now, we see that in pretty much most areas, the Antichrist mirrors Jesus in his life, multiplicity of names, the fact that we'll see later on that he dies and he's resurrected from the dead, similar to Jesus. But the Antichrist will be the worst dictator this world has ever seen. Some of the character and the rise of the Antichrist. Now, because of his supernatural origin as Satan's seed, the Antichrist will have uninterrupted access to the satanic and the demonic realm. So he is going to accept the offer that the true son rejected. Remember when Satan offered Jesus all the kingdoms of the world on the condition that Jesus would just once worship him? Well, Jesus rejected that temptation by stating that only God is to be worshipped. Now, the same offer of the kingdoms is going to be made to the counterfeit son, who will accept. The moment of acceptance will mark the beginning of his rise to political and religious domination of the world. And we can find that in Daniel chapter 11, verses 38 to 39, Revelation 13, verse 2. So it's Daniel 11, 38 to 39, Revelation 13, verse 2. So his rise to power we see in two passages, both of them in Daniel. In Daniel chapter 8, verses 23 to 25, verse 23 tells us that when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Now, this king is the Antichrist, or he will be the Antichrist. He will understand dark sentences. Now, what that means is that he'll have the same supernatural abilities to solve riddles that Daniel had. And we find it in Daniel chapter 5, verse 12. However, Daniel's source of wisdom was God, but the source for the Antichrist will be Satan. So the Antichrist is going to have the power of the occult behind him. Verse 24 of Daniel 8 goes on to say that his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. So the Antichrist will have a tremendous amount of power, but it will not be his own power. It will originate from his father, Satan. He will seek to destroy the holy people of Israel with his supernatural power. And then verse 25 goes on to tell us that through his policy, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. Now, Antichrist is characterized by craftiness and deceit. He will lull rulers into a sense of false security and then take advantage of it for the purpose of uprooting them. And for a time, he will prosper. He'll be successful in his goals. He shall magnify himself in his heart. That means that he'll consider himself superior, and this will lead to his self-declaration of deity. And we find that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 to 4, 2 Thess 2, 3 to 4, and Revelation 13, 3 to 9, Revelation 13, 3 to 9. Daniel also goes on to say that he shall also stand up against the prince of princes. Well, the prince of princes is the Messiah. And so he will truly be the Antichrist. But it goes on to say that, but he shall be broken without hand. So he'll stand up against the prince of princes, but that's about all he's going to do, stand up, and then he'll be put down. A second description of his rise to power we find in Daniel chapter 11, verse 36 to 39. Verse 36 says, and the king shall do according to his will. So Daniel describes the Antichrist as a willful king. He's characterized by self-exaltation and self-deification. Now, in his self-exaltation above all men, it says that he shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. And that we find in Daniel 7, verse 25. So he will even magnify himself above even the one true God. It goes on to say he'll not love the desire of women, which is natural to men. And so in his disregard for women, he will be, inhuman in a way. Now, the enmity of Satan against womanhood continues through Satan's seed, the Antichrist. He is going to be under the control of Satan, which we see in verses 38 and 39 of Daniel 11. And this passage states that he will honor a God that his ancestors, which would be on his mother's side, never honored. So this will be the God of fortresses, who is Satan. So his policy, Antichrist policy, will be that might is right, or might makes right. Now, with the help of this foreign god, who is Satan, he'll be able to take over the strongest defenses in the world, and he'll appear totally invincible. So whoever now submits to his authority and self-proclaimed deity, they'll be the ones who'll be elevated to high positions and positions of authority in his kingdom. It says he shall cause them to rule over many, and they shall divide the land for a price. So he will divide the conquered territory among those who will be loyal to him and confess him to be God. Now, the Antichrist, he'll be Satan controlled and Satan energized, being who will set out in his worldwide conquest. And beginning with the first seal, which is the first of the 7 seals, though total control does not come until the midpoint of the tribulation. Now, he's going to be the first horseman of the apocalypse. And he is going to be representing the key person during the tribulation period. Then we come to the second seal. And this is in Revelation chapter 6, verses 3 to 4. And when he opened the second seal, so with the second seal, verse 4, another horse came forth, a red horse. So this is the second horseman of the apocalypse. He takes peace from the earth. Now, when peace is removed from the earth, what do we have? We have war. And that's what's going to happen. So there was given to him a great sword. So the period of peace and false security that existed before the tribulation is now shattered. And as the Antichrist begins his worldwide conquest, the tribulation begins with a war. There are going to be 3 major wars during the period of the tribulation. And the second seal, which is what we're looking at here in Revelation 6, 3 to 4, is the first of these 3 wars. The second war will take place in the middle of the tribulation, and the third toward its end. And this last war is called the campaign of Armageddon. The third seal we find in chapter 6, verses 5 to 6. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." And I saw, and behold, a black horse, and he that sat thereon had a balance in his hand. So the third horseman of the apocalypse brings a worldwide famine, which often comes as a result or a consequence of war. Verse 6, we see a measure of wheat for a shilling and 3 measures of barley for a shilling. What that says to us is that there's a scarcity of these food items. So we have the judgment of a worldwide famine, but you know what? It's tempered by mercy. God is still merciful. For while there is famine of food, there'll be an abundance of medicine, because we see it says, and the oil and the wine hurt you not. Now, oil and wine, these are used for medicinal purposes, and they'll not be damaged. Fourth seal we find in verses 7 to 8 of chapter 6. When he opened the fourth seal, what did John see? Well, what John saw was a pale horse, and he that sat upon him, his name was Death, and Hades followed with him. So this fourth horseman of the apocalypse is the most deadly of all. For in this judgment, the fourth seal, there was given unto him authority over the fourth part of the earth. So 1/4 of the world's population is going to be destroyed by this man, or this apocalyptic person. The destruction comes in 4 ways. The sword, which may mean either massive slaughter or another war. Famine, meaning death by starvation. Pestilence, death by disease. And wild animals, which means you're being hunted down by wild animals. Once food becomes scarce, wild animals who generally would leave man alone will now begin to attack man for food. Fifth seal we find in verses 9 to 11. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of them that had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. So these are the martyrs of the first half of the tribulation. Verse 11 goes on to say, there was given them to each one a white robe, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little time, until their fellow servants also and their brethren who should be killed even as they were should have fulfilled their course. So what we see here is that there's going to be more believers to be killed in this first half of the tribulation. The persecution of the believers in Messiah early in the tribulation now raises 2 questions. Well, first up is, with the church already raptured, who are these saints? And how is it that they come to believe? And second, who is actually doing the persecuting? Later on in Revelation 7, we see that these people become believers by the preaching of the 144,000 Jews. As to who's killing them, Revelation shows us that it will be Ecclesiastical Babylon, which we'll cover tonight. The sixth seal we find in verses 12 to 17. Now, each series of judgments ends with convulsions of nature, and the sixth seal concludes the first series of judgments with some convulsions here. The convulsions begin with an earthquake in verse 12. It says, when he opened the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and that's followed by a blackout of the sun and moon and a meteor shower. It says the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the whole moon became as blood, and the stars of the heaven fell onto the earth. Now, the Bible speaks of 5 blackouts during the end times, and this is the second blackout. What's the result of all of this happening? Well, anarchy ensues as men begin to flee from the wrath of God rather than turn to him in faith. We see that in 15 to 17. It says, hide us from the face of him that sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. So this shows that with the fifth seal, even unbelievers recognize that they're experiencing the wrath of God. The sixth seal. And then they may have been able to explain away the previous judgments as natural catastrophes, but with the nature of the sixth seal, that will no longer be possible. Verse 17 says, for the great day of their wrath is come, and who is able to stand? So what we see with this sixth seal is that the unbelievers now recognize that it is the wrath of God, and it is not natural disasters. It is not climate change. It is the wrath of God. Now we're going to touch now on the 144,000 Jews and the worldwide revival of Revelation chapter 7. So Revelation 7 deals with the second purpose of the Great Tribulation, and that is worldwide revival. Chapter 7, verses 1 to 8 deal with the means of the worldwide revival. Now, this describes a third of the 5 things happening throughout the first half of the tribulation. And this is the ministry of the 144,000 during the seal judgments. It's the means by which the 5th seal saints come to faith in Messiah Jesus. The passage here begins after this, which is not chronological, but it's simply the next vision that John sees. Verse 1. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth. So after this, not chronological, but simply next vision John sees. So verses 1 to 3, these 4 angels are now commissioned to bring judgment on the earth, but they're commanded to hold off of their destruction. Why? It says, till we shall have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. So a specific number of servants have to be sealed. Now, in the Hebrew scriptures, a sealing was done for 2 reasons. It was done for service and also done for protection. So these servants are going to be sealed for protection so that they cannot be hurt by the judgments poured out by God, nor by the persecutions against believers. But they're also going to be sealed for service, for they are going to be the ones who will proclaim the message of the gospel in the tribulation. Verse 4 says, and I heard the number of them that were sealed, 144,000, sealed out of every tribe of the children of Israel. So the mention of the 4 winds of the earth shows us that these 144,000 Jews will come from all parts of the world, not only from Israel. So they'll be gathered from all parts of the world. Verses 5 to 8 of Revelation 7 make it very clear that 12,000 are chosen from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. This stresses that these 144,000 are Jews and will be nothing else. They will be only Jews. The emphasis here is on their Jewishness. They're from each of the 12 tribes. Now, if you look carefully at the list of names, you won't actually see Ephraim, but we do see his father Joseph in verse 8. It says, of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000. So this is not unusual because we find this same interchange in Ezekiel 37, verse 16. Another tribe is left out, tribe of Dan, but no reason is given. Now, if we were to list all the tribal names, we'd actually have 13, not 12, because remember, Joseph produced 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So in order to maintain the symmetry of the 12, one name must always be dropped. We see this in Deuteronomy chapter 33, where Moses presented his 12 tribal blessings. So too we see in Genesis 49 with Jacob when he gives his son's blessings. Moses also had to drop 1 tribe, and that was the tribe of Simeon. Ezekiel 47 to 48 describes a tribal settlement in the Messianic kingdom. And in order to maintain the symmetry of the 12, Ezekiel dropped the tribe of Levi. And what he did with that, he put that tribe in a separate place and category. So in all these cases, a name was dropped or a tribe was dropped simply to maintain symmetry. That's all. Now, this ministry of the 144,000 Jews preaching the gospel fulfills the prophecy of Matthew 24:14, where it says the gospel will reach into all the world. Now, what are the results of this? We see these in verses 9 to 17. In verses 9 to 10, John sees a multitude of Gentiles out of every nation, from every nationality. And what are they doing? They're standing before the throne of God. Where it says after these things, this means that the salvation of these myriads of Gentiles follows chronologically the 144,000 Jews. And so there's a bit of a cause and effect relationship here. We see angels, elders, and the four living creatures. What do? They all fell before the throne on their faces and worshipped God. So after describing the worship of the one on the throne in verses 11 to 12, the text proceeds to identify who these Gentiles are that are found around the throne. We see that in verses 13 to 14. These are they that come out of the great tribulation, and they washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So these are saved individuals. Why? Because they have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. Now, following chronologically the ministry of the 144,000 Jews, the implication here is that they are the Gentiles who come to Messiah as a result of the preaching of these Jews. And amongst them are the fifth seal saints who suffered martyrdom. Now, because of the massive persecution of these tribulation saints, of what they've undergone, this passage concludes with a description of the comfort they now enjoy in the presence of God in verses 15 to 17. The Lamb that is in the midst of the throne shall be their shepherd and shall guide them onto fountains of waters of life. And goes on to say that God shall wipe away every tear from their eyes. In the tribulation period, the Holy Spirit is still doing his work of regeneration. While the work of restraining evil is removed, allowing the Antichrist to begin his evil rise to power, the Holy Spirit himself will still be in the world and will have an active ministry in the areas of his other ministries, such as not only regeneration, but filling and sealing. The only thing he won't be doing will be spirit baptizing, because that's a special ministry for the church only. So the second purpose of the tribulation will now be accomplished in bringing about a worldwide revival. We come to the trumpet judgments now, which are the second series of judgments. But again, it's just a chart to help you to remember. So we see here we've done the seven seal. Well, we've done 6 of the 7 seal judgments. We're going to come into the 7 trumpet judgments now. The seventh seal contains the 7 trumpet judgments, and later on we'll see that the 7th trumpet contains the 7 bowl judgments. And the first 4 of the seal judgments are known as the 4 horsemen in the apocalypse. Trumpet judgments. Chapter 8, verses 1 to 6. We have a prelude here, a prelude before the trumpet judgments. When he opened the 7th seal, there followed silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels that stand before God, and there were given unto them 7 trumpets. So the 7th seal, containing the 2nd series of judgments called the trumpet judgments, is now opened. Now, verses 3 to 5 describe the events in heaven and earth just preceding these judgments. The act of adding incense to the prayers of the saints indicates that the trumpet judgments will answer the prayers of the saints, prayers already voiced in the 5th seal judgment. We see this in verse 5, where it says, and the angel took the censer, and he filled it with the fire of the altar and cast it upon the earth, and there followed thunders and voices and lightnings and an earthquake. So these convulsions of nature are a warning to the earth that the trumpet judgments are now about to start. And then in verse 6, the 7 angels that had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. First trumpet we find in verse 7, chapter 8. The first sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the 3rd part of the earth was burnt up, 3rd part of the trees was burnt up, all green grass was burnt up. So here we see with the sound of the first trumpet, 1/3 of the earth's dry surface is now destroyed. With the 2nd trumpet we find in verses 8 to 9, as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea. The 3rd part of the sea became blood. So this destroys 1/3 of the salt water, including sea life, and 1/3 of the ships. Now, this may refer to a meteor or a volcano, but whatever it is, the results are supernatural, for they would not of themselves turn the sea to blood. Third trumpet we find in verses 10 to 11. The third angel sounded, and there fell from heaven a great star, burning as a torch. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of the waters. So the third trumpet now destroys 1/3 of the sweet water. Now, whenever this word star is used symbolically, it is always a symbol of an angel. And this is the case, what we see here. The angel's name is Wormwood, showing him to be a fallen angel. Now, this demon causes 1/3 of the sweet water to turn bitter. And many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. Now, fallen angels are going to be used on several occasions during the tribulation to render judgment on the earth, and this is one of those occasions here. Fourth trumpet we have in verse 12, and this destroys 1/3 of the earth's light sources. The third part of the sun was smitten, the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars. The third part of them should be darkened. Now, this does not necessarily mean that 1/3 of the sun, moon, and stars are destroyed, only that their light is somehow hindered from reaching the earth. And as a result of this judgment, 1/3 of the light source for the daytime and 1/3 of the light source for the nighttime are now blacked out. In verse 13, we have the prelude to the woe judgments. And I saw and I heard an eagle flying in mid-heaven, saying with a great voice, Woe, 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 for them that dwell on the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels who are yet to sound. So 4 trumpets have sounded. Now we come to the final 3. But these are especially severe, so they are called woe judgments. They are so severe that a warning of their approach is sounded in the atmospheric heavens. This eagle mentioned here is most likely a seraph, which we can find back in Revelation chapter 4, verse 7. And it's chosen to give this warning to the earth. So the first 2 of the woe judgments are demonic invasions. And the third one contains the bowl judgments. Now, the 5th trumpet, which is the first woe judgment, is in verses 1 to 12 of chapter 9. And the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven fallen onto the earth, and there was given to him the key of the pit of the abyss. A fallen star is given the key to the abyss. Again, we have the word star used symbolically of an angel, a fallen angel. Now, the abyss is a temporary place of confinement for demons. Their final abode will actually be the lake of fire, but it's a temporary place of confinement. Fallen angels feared to be sent to the abyss when they were cast out by Jesus. We see that in Luke chapter 8, verse 31. Luke 8:31. Now, not all demons are confined in the abyss at the present time. Those confined are waiting to be released for specific judgments on mankind. Now, when the abyss is opened by the fallen angel, the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. So the third blackout now occurs in verse 2. And for the third time, all light from the sun will temporarily cease reaching to the earth. Now, out of the abyss, when it's opened up, comes the reason for the woe judgment. It says a great number of demons are released for the first of 2 demonic invasions. And out of the smoke came forth locusts upon the earth. Now, when we go on to verses 7 to 11, we'll see that the description of these locusts are there. They're not actually locusts, they're actually demons. And these demons are going to carry out the 5th trumpet judgment in verses 4 to 5. They're commanded to not destroy any vegetation, but to torment only those who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And this torment is going to go on for 5 months or 150 days. So these demons are limited as to how much destruction they do. and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. So unsaved mankind will be open to torment, but not to death. So the 144,000 Jews, and quite probably all believers at the time, are excluded from any harm in this first demonic invasion. Now, not only will the demons be unable to kill, but the tormented men will be unable to kill themselves also. They can't commit suicide. Because verse 6 says, in those days men shall seek death, and it shall in no wise find it. So because of this tremendous torment inflicted by these demons for these 5 months, people will attempt suicide, but they'll fail. They'll be forced to endure the torment in all its fury for 150 days of torment. Now, the description of the locust scorpions given in verses 7 to 10 shows that they are something other than literal scorpions or locusts. They come from the abyss, showing us that these are demons. It's not unusual for demons and other angelic beings to have animal-like features. And in fact, this is true of the seraphim in Revelation 4. It's also, you can find it back in Isaiah as well, the same thing. The one who opened the abyss and who is king over them is identified here in verse 11. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek tongue he had the name Apollyon. Now, both words mean destruction. The first, verse 12 says, the first woe is past. Behold, there come yet 2 woes hereafter. So their respite is very short-lived because there are 2 more woes to go. Now we come to the 6th trumpet, which is the second woe judgment in chapter 9, 13 to 21. The 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the horns of the golden altar which is before God. Now, verse 14 goes on to say, loose the 4 angels that are bound at the great river Euphrates. So there are 4 fallen angels bound at the Euphrates River. They're going to be released. And these are going to be the leaders of the second demonic invasion in verses 13 to 14. The first invasion just tormented, but this one, led by the 4, are now commanded that they should kill the 3rd part of men. So 1/3 of the earth's population is going to be killed by this second invasion. So this second woe is worse than the first. And the number of demons involved in this invasion was twice 10,000 times 10,000. That's 200 million. It's verse 16, 200 million. This demonic army is led by these 4 fallen angels. So this is not a human army, as some speculators say. Excuse me. The announcement of the number of creatures in this army is followed by a description of what this army will look like in verses 17 to 19. The description given here shows this to be a demonic and not of human origin. Out of their mouths proceeded fire and smoke and brimstone. By these 3 plagues was the 3rd part of men killed, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone, which proceeded out of their mouths. The destruction of 1/3 of the world's population is accomplished supernaturally by fire, smoke, brimstone. Verses 20 to 21, and the rest of mankind who were not killed with these plagues repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons. And they repented not of their murders, nor of their sorceries. So after all of this, after the 5 months of torment, after this time of all of them dying, 1/4 dying, still, mankind still refuses to repent and turn to God in faith. Another passage describing the 2 demonic invasions mentioned in Revelation 9 is Joel chapter 1, verses 15 to 2:11. Now, Joel, he's a minor prophet. Joel begins to portray this demonic invasion by describing the devastation of the day of Jehovah, meaning the tribulation. And that's in chapter 1, verses 15 to 20 of Joel. After announcing its approach, he says, alas, for the day of Jehovah is at hand, and as destruction from the Almighty shall it come. He then relates the results on the crops in verses 16 to 17. The crops are destroyed. Little will remain either for the temple, which is the house of our God, verse 16, or for sustenance. The barns are broken down, for the grain is withered, verse 17. Now, this is followed by a description of the devastation of the livestock in verses 18 to 20. This is all happening in the tribulation period. The cattle have no pasture. The flocks of sheep are made desolate. Fire has burned all the trees of the field. The water brooks are all dried up. Devastation and destruction everywhere. In Joel 2, 1 to 11, Joel then proceeds to give an account of the invasion itself. The alarm is sounded, blow ye the trumpet in Zion. That's to announce the approaching army of demons, giving clear evidence that the day of Jehovah has arrived with a vengeance. He then describes the day of Jehovah. It's a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. Like dawn spreading suddenly across the mountains, so sudden and widespread is this judgment of the day of Jehovah. It is then that Joel points to the invading army in second part of verse 2 to verse 9. He then describes their approach, which shows their uniqueness. He says it's a great people and a strong. There has not been ever the like, neither shall be any more after them. And the devastation they bring, a fire devours before them, and behind them a flame burns. Verse 3. What is related here is similar to the Revelation passage and points to something other than human. The description of the invading army is presented next in verses 4 to 9, giving their appearance. The appearance of them is as the appearance of horses. The noise, it's like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains. It's like the noise of a flame of fire that devours. Terror. At their presence, the peoples are in anguish. All faces are waxed pale because they're terrified. They run like mighty men. They break not their ranks. That's the speed. They're disciplined. It says they break not off their course. So this is a very, very disciplined army. In their attack, it says they leap upon the city in verse 9. Again, what we see here is the similarity with Revelation is just so striking, and it confirms that these invaders must be demons. In verse 10, the earth quakes before them. The heavens tremble. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shining. So the results of this demonic invasion include convulsions of nature and a total blackout, the third one of the end time. And then the passage concludes with the reason for the invasion, and it says it's the judgment of God in verse 11. Jehovah utters his voice before his army, for his camp is very great. Well, the army is great, for there are 200 million demons, and it is enough for God to execute his command, the destruction of 1/3 of humanity. But even with the sixth trumpet judgment, mankind still refuses to repent. Similar thing we saw back in we see in Revelation 9, 20 to 21. They still continue to worship the same demons who have tormented them for 5 months and have just destroyed 1/3 of the human population. Trumpet judgments come to an end by the middle of the tribulation period. And now, in Revelation 11, verses 3 to 6, we have the two witnesses. The fourth activity in the first half of the tribulation is the ministry of the two witnesses. This is in the first half of the tribulation. Revelation 11, 3 to 6 provides information about these men. In verse 3, they shall prophesy 1,260 days. That's 1,260 days, which is equivalent to 3.5 years. Remember, a Jewish month is 30 days. So these 3.5 years cover the first half of the tribulation period. The identity of these witnesses is given in verse 4. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the Lord of the earth. So these two men are said to be the fulfillment of Zechariah chapter 4, verses 11 to 14. Zechariah 4:11 to 14. In that passage, the question, Zechariah asks a question: what are these two olive trees upon the right side of the candlestick and upon the left side thereof? Then said he, these are the two anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. So in verses 5 to 6 here in Revelation 11, their ministry and their authority is described. So we see that these two witnesses, Zechariah spoke about them in Zechariah 4. And so their ministry is described here. It says, fire proceeded out of their mouth and devours their enemies. The two witnesses will have power to kill others by fire. And this power will be used against those who are seeking to kill the witnesses before their proper time has come. The two witnesses will also receive authority to cause drought by withholding rain, and to turn water into blood, and to cause other plagues. We see that in verse 6. Perhaps similar to the 10 that fell on Egypt, for instance. Turning water into blood was one of them. Now, who are these two witnesses? Some say Elijah and Enoch. Why? Because they've never died. However, both of them are already taken to heaven, and they're now immortal. So these two cannot be the witnesses, because the witnesses are going to get killed. So these guys can't die again. So it's not them. Others say Elijah and Moses both appeared at the Transfiguration, both performed similar miracles. So could be them. But again, and also what people say is, well, because they did very similar miracles, well, it must be Moses and Elijah. Well, God can use anyone to do miracles. God is the one who does the miracles anyway. Again, with these two men, Elijah and Moses, both are immortal, can't die again. So who then are they? Well, it's simply best to take the two witnesses to be two Jewish prophets whom God will raise up during the tribulation time. They're purely future persons and not two men from the past. The scriptures do teach that Elijah is to return before the tribulation, and he will conduct a ministry during this time. But there's no scriptural reason to make Elijah one of the two witnesses. God will simply elevate two Jewish men to the office of prophet and will endow them with miraculous powers. So their exact identity, well, we won't know until the tribulation period. Now we come to that thing called the Ecclesiastical Babylon, which we find in chapter 17 of Revelation, verses 1 to 6. This is the fifth thing that happens throughout the first half of the tribulation, and this is the rule of Ecclesiastical Babylon. There's going to be two political systems during the tribulation. One during the first half, which are those 10 kings. You remember, the one world government was split into 10 kingdoms, 10 kings, and then there'll be a separate political system in the second half, and that will be the Antichrist. He will rule. He'll be the sovereign dictator. There'll also be two religious systems, one for each half of the tribulation. Revelation 17 verses 1 to 6 describes a religious system of the first half, the first 3.5 years. In verses 1 to 2, John is invited to come hither. I will show you the judgment of the great harlot that sits upon many waters. So this is a judgment that's about to fall on the great harlot. Now, to prostitute something is to take that which has a proper use and use it improperly. A prostitute takes sex, which has a proper use, and perverts it with improper use, turning it into something illicit, causing fornication. Here, the harlot that we see here, the great harlot, represents religion, which has a proper use. We find it in James chapter 1, verses 26 to 27, its proper use. But here in Revelation 17, it has been prostituted for improper use. Rather than serving, it rules. The false use of religion causes spiritual fornication. Now, the word fornication is used both of physical unfaithfulness and also of spiritual unfaithfulness And we see examples of this in Hosea chapters 1 and 2, Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 20, and chapter 3, verses 1 to 9, Ezekiel 16, 15 to 41, and Ezekiel 23, 5 to 44. The woman here is sitting upon many waters in verse 1, which is interpreted, or which is explained for us in verse 15, and it refers to the world population. Verse 15 says, and he says unto me, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So the waters, the many waters, it's simply the world population. It is with this woman that the kings of the earth commit fornication. Now, these are the 10 kings of the earth, 10 rulers, showing this to be a unity of religion and state. So these, again, will be the 10 kings who are ruling at this time. In verse 3, I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So this means that this false religious system does have the support of civil government during the first half of the tribulation and is able to rule because it is supported by the government. The description and identification of this woman is given in verses 4 to 5. The woman is seen as being very wealthy and influential. She's decked with gold and precious stone and pearls. And her full name is Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So what is found in these verses is the final form of religious apostasy, ending in a one-world superchurch. It is a final form of the woman Jezebel, back in Revelation 2 and 3, Revelation 3, which is cast into the great tribulation and united with the apostate Laodicean church, which we find in Revelation 2, verses 20 to 22. So, and that would be apostate Protestantism. This is a counterfeit bride of Messiah, presented as a prostitute in contrast with the true bride of Messiah, presented as a pure virgin. And we find this in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 2. This is the church, the bride, pure virgin. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 2, Ephesians 5, 25 to 27, and Revelation 19, verse 6 to 8. Babylon the harlot represents the one world religious system that rules over the religious affairs during the first half of the tribulation. She rules over the nations of the world, which is the many waters, and she's fully controlling religious affairs and has the reluctant support of the government. The headquarters of this one world religion will be the rebuilt city of Babylon, which is the mother of idolatry. For it was here that idolatry and false religion began, and you can have a look at that back in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 to 9, Genesis 11, verses 1 to 9. In verse 6, John says, I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So this answers the question as to who was killing and hurting the fifth seal saints. It's this false super church. The myriads of Gentiles who are saved under the ministry of the 144,000 Jews will suffer persecution by Ecclesiastical Babylon, and many will be martyred. These then are the events of the first half of the tribulation. Some of them are sequential, one following the other in chronological order. Included in these are the seal and the trumpet judgments. There are also 5 things that present throughout the first half of the tribulation. We're going to see the ministry of Elijah. We have the 144,000 Jewish evangelists, a worldwide revival, the ministry of the 2 witnesses, political system of the 10 kings, and the religious system of the Ecclesiastical Babylon. And here again, I've given you that chart again, just for your, just to help you. So we're going to see that the first trumpet, we see 1/3 of the dry earth destroyed. The second trumpet, 1/3 of the salt water destroyed. The third trumpet, 1/3 of the fresh water destroyed. The fourth trumpet, 1/3 of the heavens destroyed. And then we have a third blackout. And then we have the first invasion of demons, simply the torment for that 5 months, 150 days. And that's the first woe judgment. Then we have the second invasion of demons, and that's to kill 1/3 of humanity. And that's the second woe judgment. And then we will see next time around the seventh trumpet, which is the third woe judgment. And we'll see that in the events of the middle of the tribulation. So that wraps it up for this session, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you for coming along. Study hard and grow strong.